Hello, I am Carolyn Monahan, the Director of Marketing and Communications for the West Coast Chamber. The Ottawa County Department of Public Health has been working tirelessly to keep us informed during this COVID-19 outbreak. So when we have questions from our members, we know that they are a reliable source of information. So today I am joined by Senior Epidemiologist Darrell Glassauer, and he's here to help us answer some questions about how businesses can get back to work safely. So welcome, Darrell, and thank you for taking time to answer questions with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So as more industries are reopening and employees are headed back to work, what should an employer do if an employee is showing symptoms of the coronavirus?
I think that's a great question, and it's one that's going to be on a lot of people's minds just because they're seeing the volume of cases in their communities and just realizing that there's a high probability that if you have a large place of business that one of your staff members may come down with COVID-19. I think behind that question is prevention. So are there things that we can do in our facilities to ensure that there's social distancing and procedures and processes to discourage transmission? And right with that is a good screening protocol. So hopefully you've identified that person even before they're in your building and can send them home before they step foot in a place where they can transmit it to your employees. So if there's one thing to do right after that, it's to send that person home. And then when you're thinking about when they can return to work, the CDC has specific criteria that we use for determining when someone is eligible for return to work.
Now, what if they've been exposed, but they're not showing any symptoms?
Another great question. So what we're talking about there is a person who's a contact to a case. So someone who may have been exposed to someone while they were symptomatic. And there's not necessarily an easy answer to that. The answer is yes and no. If someone has been exposed, so meaning that they've had close contact with a case, usually within 6 feet for a few minutes or more, they're typically considered exposed and would be eligible for quarantine. But it depends on what field the employee is in. If they're a critical infrastructure worker, healthcare, for example, an exposed person who's a contact to a case can return to work as long as they're not showing any symptoms. Others that are not in critical infrastructure and have been exposed to a case and are deemed eligible for quarantine should stay home and quarantine themselves until 14 days after they were last exposed to the case.
So as employees are coming back into work, are employers required to provide personal protection equipment or PPE for them?
Executive Order 77 has some really good language in there addressing that question. In addition to that, there are other resources that the business community can go to. The Michigan Economic Recovery Council has some recommendations. And in both the executive order and in the Michigan Economic Recovery Council's documentation, there is a recommendation in the council's documents and explicit language in the executive order that businesses should provide face coverings to their employees. There is some caveats to that. We all want the best for our employees. So N95s and other respirator type masks are not recommended, or it's recommended to avoid those just because those are in high demand and need to be used in acute care settings like hospitals. So face coverings are recommended and required per the executive order.
Now, if an employee is not wanting to wear PPE, can employers mandate that they do?
I think that's up to the facility to write that information into their policies and procedures. Because it's written into the executive order and there's an expectation that people take precautions to prevent the spread of coronavirus, facilities can make decisions that's best for their organization and potentially could require masking for their employees.
So where would you say is the best source of information for employers looking for ways to safely reopen, for some real solid guidelines?
There's a number of resources that are out there. One of the best that I've seen is the Michigan Economic Recovery Council has really great documentation specific to industries. In addition to that, there is guidance from a number of local organizations that you can find on the West Coast Chamber's website and other websites locally for specific information about how to open safely for your industry. In addition to that, the Ottawa County Department of Public Health has a short document that people can refer to with recommendations for prevention, but also on page 2 has a number of links that businesses can go to for reopening recommendations and other criteria.
Thank you, Darrell. We are so happy that there are people like you who have made it your life's work to study this. So I want to thank you again for talking with me today.
You bet.